bass design, audio myths, and the new Sourcepoint V10 flagship floor standing loudspeaker, legendary speaker designer Andrew Jones joins us to discuss today. Before we dive right into the interview with Andrew Jones, I just wanted to give you some additional tidbits of data that were not available at the time of the interview. That has to do mostly with the Sourcepoint V10 loudspeaker by MoFi that Andrew Jones and I discussed. This interview was conducted at AXPONA this year, and Andrew Jones was showcasing a new flagship loudspeaker that is a larger version of the previous 888 speaker called the V10. A couple of things I wanted to point out. When you compare the 888 to the V10, you can see some of this from the videos online that I posted. It's quite a bit of a larger speaker. In fact, each unit weighs 160 pounds. So even though the price point isn't considered super high end, you're getting into like this big realm where a lot of speakers kind of land that are on the larger side, that are like true audiophile pieces. They take up a little bit of room, and for like dedicated audiophiles who have the space and the time and the love for high fidelity sounds, this is that type of speaker. And another thing that was not available at the time that I recently got was that the price is likely to be, and don't quote me on this, but it's likely to be around $9,000. So it would be the most expensive speaker in the Sourcepoint line from MoFi's to date. So with all that being said, just a quick resume rundown for Andrew Jones. He's worked for a lot of the bigs. Pioneer really pushed his fame, but he's also worked for Elac and KEF and now MoFi. So he's done a lot of different projects, been in the industry forever. One of the great minds I like to tap into if I get a chance. So here we go, on with the show. Andrew Jones of MoFi Electronics. Today's episode is sponsored by Nordost. Ready to take your system to the next level? Transform the way you listen with Nordost's world-class hi-fi cables and audio enhancers. Nordost's superior design philosophy and exacting craftsmanship bring out every musical detail, connecting you with the tunes you love. Hear the difference as your equipment comes to life, turning every listening session into an unforgettable audio journey. Nordost, the clear choice for the best connection. That's www.nordost.com. Today's episode of The Occasional Podcast is sponsored by DeVore Fidelity. DeVore Fidelity has been hand-building their speakers in Brooklyn, New York for 25 years. Each pair of speakers is handcrafted to bring you closer to the music in your collection. Check out their entire line of speakers and where to hear them for yourself at DeVoreFidelity.com. That's DeVoreFidelity.com. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. With absolutely zero prep, I go into this interview with the wonderful Andrew Jones because I know he can handle it. Everything's just going to like pop up. And to be completely honest with you, I wasn't sure if I could have you on this time because someone asked, are you having Andrew Jones on the show? He has a new speaker coming out. And I said, I don't know, because it will be the 5th time and he probably needs a jacket and I don't have one available. So welcome to the 5-Timers Club, Andrew.
The 5-timers to talk about my V10.
It's a multiple. It's pretty close. Good segue. So we're here at an audio show, and there is a new speaker out. And as you guys remember, we've talked about a lot of different things on the show. Andrew's gone through, if you want to go through the history, how to build your own Andrew Jones speaker. We've got all the stuff, so check those out. But we are on the precipice of something new. And why don't you let's just revisit a little history of this speaker that you've done with MoFi, and then we'll build up to the new speaker. So, obviously with Elac for a while and Pioneer and all this before, but when you came to MoFi, can we just recap kind of what you wanted to do with the newest series of speakers that you're on right now?
Yeah, I mean, the whole concept was we can be retro because it was in, big speakers in, good bass is big bass drivers. So that was the brief. What do I do with that? And since I always like concentric drivers, but I got a price point. Do I do a 3-way like I've been doing with a big bass driver? Or, wait a minute, I could break my own rules and do a 2-way because it's a big bass driver. It's hardly moving for most of the music. So that became Sourcepoint 10, a 10-inch 2-way concentric. Launched it, and supposed to be big, but people who walk in, ooh, I didn't think it was going to be that big. Well, how small could it be with a 10-inch driver? So hence the Sourcepoint 8, which was just kind of trim down the 10-inch driver till it's 8-inch and create the smaller system. So we've got now 2 stand mount speakers. Natural progression would be to do a stand mount. So turn it into a 3-way, of course. Why not when you're doing a stand mount? Add 2 bass drivers, specially developed to, again, long throw, underhung motor structures, and vents on the back. So that's the Sourcepoint 888. But as I was developing all of that, the development for the motor structure from all the calculations I'd done, I need the same motor strength and coil details for the 8-inch as I would do for a 10-inch. So why don't I build the 10-inch drivers, prototypes, as I'm developing the 8-inch? And same with the cabinet. Let's get in a prototype 8-inch cabinet and a 10-inch. Of course, when I saw the 10-inch, it's big. So we decided, yeah, we'll move forward with the 8-inch and see how that goes. So launched 888. Of course, people from time to time go, well, you got a 8-inch and a 10-inch bookshelf, but you only got an 8-inch tower. Are you going to do a 10-inch? And well, maybe. And I'd go in, every time I go into my lab and see these drivers laying around and this cabinet, thinking, I really should do something with this. So I started to do something with it. And I had to modify the cabinet, so I needed a second cabinet sample. Started putting it all together. Yeah, this is a beast. And it could be a product. So everyone got on board with that. And so I've been working on it since the release of the 888, and that's what I'm showing here. And I mean, yes, it's big, but sometimes Gilbert Briggs, Wharfdale back in the 50s, he had this expression, a good big un will beat a good little un. And yes, they do within certain bounds. You know, the big cabinets talk more, so you've got to be very careful with the bracing and the structure. But started listening to it, thinking, yeah, this is really good. And development-wise, I was calling it the 10-10-10. But it doesn't trip off the tongue as easy as 888. It's a bit like Rin Tin Tin, that cartoon thing from the old days. So it was one of our guys, Durda, who came up with, the other difference with the capability of this has got and tuning it much lower, you start to run into difficulty if you're using vents because they either get so ridiculously long as you increase the area or they're too small and they overload. So I'm going to use passive radiators.
Okay.
So I developed some 10-inch passive radiators. So I got 2 10-inch passive radiators on the back. So it's now 5 10-inch things, a 10-inch concentric, 10-inch bass drivers, 10-inch passives. So Durda said, we should call it the V10. And I kind of like that. And then, since this is a big muscle speaker, it's like Dodge Viper or something, V10 engine. I thought, yeah, that's going to work. So it became the V10.
Is there a certain point where a larger speaker, there's just no acoustic gains? Like if you made a 12, I mean, you laid it out there, I'm going to ask. If you did a 12, are there more gains, or have you reached we don't need a 100-foot speaker. Is there some advantage to a 100-foot speaker?
When you look at box size bandwidth efficiency, there's this Hoffman's iron law. So if you pick 2, the other is a given. So for a given size box, if you want it to go down to say 20 hertz, the efficiency level is limited. Or you can make it highly efficient in a big box, but it won't go down very low. Can't break that. But within those bounds, you can't just make a very efficient 8-inch driver in a big box that goes down low. There's certain parameters, you think, well, how do I make something efficient? I reduce cone mass, reduce moving mass, I increase BL. That's not enough. You can't have any combination of those will give you a flat, high efficiency response down to that cutoff frequency. It'll be very high in the midband, it'll actually be lower efficiency in the low frequencies. So you have to have the right cone area. And it turns out you have to keep putting more and more cone area to keep on increasing the efficiency and getting flat response. So in that sense, going from a 10 to a 12, I could make a more efficient speaker in a bigger box. But what's a practical limit for home use? It's what we do in PA, but do I need it that big in a home? People who've had the 888, they keep coming in going, oh my God, it can do so much, right? So the 10 gives even more, but for most people, do they really need more than that? You could argue there's certain kind of music that would benefit it. You can think of home theatre, where more is not from a musical perspective, it's can it do explosions? Can it do those really subterranean notes where excursion is everything? We're not in that market. And home theatre systems, you very rarely have huge speakers in a home theatre system. You hand it over to dedicated powered subwoofers. So I think it'll probably reach the limit on this for what we really need to do, especially when you're trying to get these price points that are relatively affordable. It's not a $200,000 speaker where you could impress the hell out of someone by having dual or 4 12s and then 4 10s and 2 6s and a tweeter and that kind of thing. There is a market for it. It's not a market I'm aiming for.
You've worked with all these different price points. Is it something in you that you aspire to do to have the most people, your love of speaker and your designs, to reach the most people instead of just doing it because it's the best no-cost object? Like, do you get more gratification for more people being able to put your product in more hands, or having a tiny group of rich people? It could, whatever, but it would have to be to have no holds barred. It's like, this is the best I can do. Those are a different set of goals. Are you saying that like your life's work in a way is not really the latter, but more the former?
It's very gratifying to do, let's say, the best that could possibly be done. Cost no object. But even TAD was not cost no object. And even if you look at how many ridiculously expensive speakers there are, it's not that there's only one $500,000 speaker. So everything is always price competitive. Even though you think, well, $500,000 is cost no object. No, because there's another one you're competing against. So if someone creates a market at a new price point, others will follow. So you've got to be competitive with that. That's interesting, but it takes a lot of time, and your company's got to be structured to handle that kind of thing. And part of the reason they're so expensive is to reach the market of the people who can afford that, to play in that market, is hugely expensive. So it's not somewhere, I toy with the idea of the technicalities of creating that, but it's not really somewhere that it is practically enough for me. And to be honest, I like walking around and everything. Oh, I got your speaker. I love your speaker. That's a nice feeling that what you've done has mattered to a lot of people. And I'd rather have that than some billionaire kind of saying, oh, well done.
Well done. This made a great collectible against my menagerie of exotic animals that are now extinct. I put it right next to the new thing I just bought. Nice chuckle sweater, that kind of thing. This is, I feel like, one of the things that kind of separates maybe some of the designer mentality from the consumer mentality. Are there any other, when you talk to the people that really digest your stuff or you read about things, what are like the biggest points to you that are a difference between consumer and designer? Where are like the misconceptions or like just the things where maybe the forums have gone awry? Are there a couple of things? Because I feel like when I talk to you and I talk to them, you have certain goals, but they don't exactly match up in the way I think the goals of the consumer generally do. Yours seem practical from your perspective, and a lot of consumers seem quite impractical in their consumption. Does that make sense?
Yeah, there's also, there's lots of myths about performance of particular products. And there's the reality of what they can do, and then the myth of what they're actually achieving. And it annoys me, or what people say their products can do versus what the reality is that they actually do, and whether they're called out on that. I've always been especially growing up with Kef and then being in Pioneer, they are rigorous about if you make claims for something like technical performance, sensitivity, bass extension, impedance, that it's got to be fully verifiable and conform to one of the standards that have been set for how you specify different parameters. Otherwise, you've got no point of comparison. Now, you can choose to totally ignore that and say, well, when I listened to this speaker, I really liked it. Fantastic. Say we could define what the frequency response should be. There's all this, you measure it this way, it's supposed to measure this curve. Fine. You might not like that. Those curves are developed as a preference, most preferable by most people. But you look at the marketplace and you go, people like a lot of different things.
Yeah.
And so once you identify what, in my case, what I want to create to conform to, if people like it, it sells. If they don't, it doesn't. I often say, if enough people like what I like, I have a business. Mm-hmm. If they don't, I have a hobby. Mm-hmm. And it's just absolutely true. Yeah. So, and you look at the diversity in the marketplace, even, it's often been discussed, surely, as you've got more and more money to spend on designing a speaker, the performance gravitates to a common performance that very expensive speakers should all sound the same because you've got enough money to make them have that perfect frequency response and distortion, whatever. The fact is, the more expensive it is, the more divergent you have in ideas of what you're going to try. And the marketplace is small enough that you've always got 3 people who are going to buy that speaker of yours, so you have a business. It's just the crossover between what you're saying the speaker can do and what it measures like. At least kind of be honest in that.
Our friends at ZMF Headphones are sponsors of today's episode. ZMF is a curated collection of various sounds and styles in the form of dynamic and planar magnetic wood headphones, designed by founder Zach Merbach since 2011. ZMF has garnered an A+ recommended component in Stereophile, Headphone of the Year on Headphonics.com, and been a 2-time winner of the SBAF Golden Schlong Award. ZMF Headphones. That's the letter ZMF. HEADPHONES.com. ZMF Headphones is the place to go to check out ZMF's collection and learn more. ZMF, traditional craft and modern acoustics. Tired of audio reviews that sound like they were written by robots? Us too. For the last 15 years, Part-Time Audiophile has been an open revolt against boring. And this year, we're doubling down. We have a brand new look and a brand new name, but the same old attitude. Find us at pt.audio for all your turntable throwdowns and amplifier face-offs. Great sound meets good times at pt.audio. It's my assumption that you audition, different types of box materials, obviously different drivers, and most certainly different types of crossover units. Do you audition different types of wire?
So, it always comes down to engineering decisions, right? So let's get back into the realm of value for money, which is where everything has a value for money, regardless of the price point. But it's more critical as you do lower cost systems, which I've concentrated in recent years because I kind of enjoy that challenge.
Yeah.
But so if I look at, say, improving components, so whether it's capacitors, inductors, whatever, or cable, and I look, once you move away from the standard components into specialized components, the cost skyrockets. And you could pay $100 for a capacitor. I'm not putting that in a $300 speaker, clearly. But I might be have room for a slightly better quality component, but it's always going to be, if this component costs this and that one costs that, which one has the most significant change compared to, what if I just built a much stiffer box, put better damping material in, engineered a better motor structure, lower distortion, a better cone material. They are going to make, when I've got the choice of everything that goes in the speaker, I'm not even buying someone else's drive unit to put in, I'm engineering the drive unit from scratch. If I've got all those choices, my belief is I make more of an impact in performance by fiddling around with those parts rather than some esoteric type of component. Now, if you're going outside of that black box, which is the complete speaker, and assembling a system, have at it. If you feel this cable or this conditioner or whatever improves the sound of the system, that is you acting as the designer of your system, not inside the black boxes, but outside of them. The choice of which black box, and then how to connect them and power them up. And if it makes a significant difference to you for the sound you get compared to, again, do you spend it on a cable? Do you spend it on a power conditioner? Do you spend it on this, that, the other? Those are your choices, and you're welcome to make those choices. I make my choices inside my black box, and then you just choose, I like my black box, or I like someone else's black box. So that's the way I look at it. So inside, I find much better ways of spending money, in my view, by concentrating on those engineering aspects of improved driver or box performance than I would from just changing a crossover component. I'm not saying it doesn't make a difference, but it's always going to be small to what I can do to a driver for the same money.
Yeah. See, that's...
Now, at some point, if within the parameters of my design, I think I've run out of ideas of how to make a better driver in this system, then I could pay attention to those other parts to fine-tune and just keep on incrementally improving it. But that would be the order of the way I deal with those different parts.
Just like the way I try to do my job is I try to focus on the things that make the most difference first.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. You've obviously had a long career. You've learned, I'm assuming, a lot of things.
You're calling me old.
I'm not calling you old, but he came in here with one of those walkers and a tennis ball. You guys can't see it. It has 2 tennis balls on the end, and I'm teasing.
And you suggested walking up the 16 flights. I quickly shut you down on that one.
And I said, my foot hurts a little bit. Will you please put me on your back like the Wookiee in R2-D2? And for some reason, he didn't go for that either. What do you think you've kind of learned in doing this series of speakers, your new speakers? What have you learned if you drew a line in the sand from your joining the MoFi to the release of the V10 now? What has been the thing that you have stuck out most to you that you've learned from this process with this line?
It's quite interesting because, again, with Elac, mostly concentrating on very affordable. And I stepped up a bit in price point with MoFi. But also, a lot of the tower speakers I did for MoFi didn't necessarily go particularly deeper than the bookshelves. They had extra sensitivity, efficiency, output capability. But I've gone back to kind of totally re-engineering my approach to the tower speakers compared to what the bookshelves could do. And it's fun to get back to going, that's what bass is. I'm enjoying that extra octave, the extra power output. I don't want to bother with subwoofers. I'd rather engineer it into the speaker itself. Then it's under my control, it's properly integrated. Subwoofers, it's kind of, you try having a go. You try playing Mr. Speaker Designer without the tools or the knowledge to do that. So you're endlessly tweaking and trying, and it sounds right, but then it sounds good on this record, not so good. So having integrated is, in that sense, better. Now you could argue that, yeah, but then that limits the location of the kind of subwoofer section built within that speaker to the placement of where the rest of the speaker goes to. So that's a limitation, but it's surprising how good you can make it. And so would you rather have poor integration between bass and mid-bass, but better, very low frequency integration in the room by moving just the subwoofer around? That is a choice, but it'll be very difficult to get that integration as good as I would do it in a tower speaker. And so now, working on that 888, once I got that going, wow, this is really good. It's really fun having all that extra bass. And then with the V10, my room is 20 by 30 by 11. So it's a big space. Yeah. And it just powers that system in that room. Get a few hundred watts on the amplifier and then wait for the neighbors to be gone.
You've done a lot of high efficiency speakers. Is that born out of a need for diversity in amplifier, or is there something intentionally nice about that in regards to sound?
So if we go back to the idea of, as a system, there's a limit to what sensitivity you can have with the bass response. It's all driven by what the bass driver can do. The mid-range driver could be as efficient as you want. The tweeter can be. You pad them down in the crossover till they match the level of what the bass can achieve. And you think, well, that's a waste. But it isn't, because the more efficient a regular type driver, let's not consider horns right now, but the more efficient inherently the driver is, it needs less power to reach a certain sound pressure level, so you reduce thermal distortion characteristics. As a voice coil, you put power in, voice coil heats up, sensitivity drops, so the frequency response of your speaker is dependent on the past history of the heating power of the music you just played. And it takes time for it to settle back to normal, so you get this long, loud passage, but you keep on hearing for a few seconds after the sound gradually getting back to what it should be in terms of sound balance. And especially so for tweeters, because tweeters have got very little inherent power handling capability. 5-10 watts at best of continuous power. So you've got that thermal effect going on. Then also, the more current flowing through the voice coil, creating a magnetic field that reacts against the fixed field from the magnet. And I say fixed, and I don't mean fixed. You hope it's fixed, but it isn't. And it interacts with the field going through the coil. So you get a modulation distortion there. And so if you've made the whole system, or the whole speaker driver, much more efficient, you need less current flowing through the coil. So you get less modulation distortion. So higher efficiency drivers tend to be lower distortion. And then you apply that again to the tweeter. So now you get more dynamic sound because you've removed some of these distortion mechanisms. So even though the system might still be an 85 dB, but the mid-range was about 90, 91, 92. I've done tweeters that are soft dome tweeters, 98 dB at 10K and 104 at 2K. And then I pad them down and incredibly dynamic as a result. So I do chase efficiency from that point of view. It's safe. I think it was a Pioneer speaker I did that I'd got 30 ohms in series with the tweeter. I padded it down so much. And this Italian magazine used to do power testing, brief burst power testing. And they use a 500 amplifier. And normally, most tweeters are basically burnt out by the time you reach the 500 watt level. Mine didn't. They said, we've never had something like this. And it's because I try and engineer it that way.
There's an idea that amplifiers warm up or they sound better if they've been sitting out. Given what you just kind of said on the subject, is there any credence to the idea that a speaker might sound better if you've warmed it up over time? Do you think that rooms inherently sound better on the Sunday at a show over the Friday because they've been warmed up in some manner or fashion?
Well, I mean, I will always say that by the time the show's ended, you're finally happy with the sound of the system. But partly that is because you continue to tweak. You also continue to refine which pieces of music you think work best. Yeah. And so I'm not saying it is better by Sunday evening. It does seem that. And there's a big psychological component there. With obviously when listening, there's a psychological component. Are there substantial changes to the speaker, especially if it's a speaker you've been using for a lot of shows? No. They're just no. But you can't ignore we're humans, and we're emotionally involved with listening to the music. So anything that makes you feel better about yourself or the environment, you're going to enjoy the reproduction better. And Sunday's the day when you've finally relaxed, you've been worried, trying to set up, then all the reviewers are going to come round too soon, right? All wanting to get in the door the first day, and you're thinking, I was 1 o'clock this morning, I finally thought, I guess that'll do for the first day. And then you'll walk in and go, can we have a listen to your system? And you want to go, no.
When you're doing the design phase of your speakers, what you mentioned like some psychological phenomenon. What personal psychological phenomenon are you aware of that you've like internalized for yourself, and how do you try to avoid it when you're listening? As in, I think the most simplest thing, like sometimes when I'm in a good mood, I'll give you an example, stuff sounds better. And sometimes when I'm worried about something, all of a sudden the sound is whatever. It might affect that in that way. Do you yourself go through that, and are there any processes that you kind of have in place to help you alleviate some of whatever you might, because you don't want to be like, oh, the mood's swinging my thing?
That is real. And especially in the early days of evaluating it, you kind of think, I hope this is going to work out well, and I hope this sounds better than something else, and I'd hate to find out that it's actually worse after I've put in all this work. And so you listen it to the first time. I will say, when I first listened to the prototype of the Sourcepoint V10, it's good. Oh, wow, this idea does work. I can keep on tweaking it a bit, but the concept of what I wanted to achieve is giving me something that I think I haven't had before. But still, you don't want to get too caught up in that. Something fresh and new always seems better until you listen to it in the cold heart light of tomorrow, and you go, yeah, I think you were just too wanting it to sound so good because it's your new design. So you have to keep checking yourself and listening at different times of day after you've been doing different things. Come back next week and say to yourself, is it really, really as good as I thought it was? I'm just wishing it was. And you've got to be careful not to keep going around that wheel.
Do you do like an A-B thing to kind of compare it? And how long do you spend on like each A-B thing?
I typically do not do a lot of A-B testing. I certainly don't do ABX testing. Now that is so extraordinarily difficult to set up and properly, if you're going to be properly analytical and do all statistical calculations of it. I don't have time. I don't have the ability. I'm a physicist. I'm not a mathematician. I would say physicists are failed mathematicians, engineers are failed physicists, and I might work my way down to engineer. So I couldn't do that statistical analysis, and I don't have time. And you want to fool yourself that, well, I know what I'm doing, but I can be fooled as easily by anyone else. But you just don't want, in a way, you don't want to find out you've been fooled by yourself. Mm-hmm. So it's a very difficult process. And anytime you do a comparison, if you know what you're listening to, you're going to hope that the new one sounds better, and you might fool, if you know it's the new one you're listening to, you might automatically just, oh yeah, I think I like that better. But if you come back the next day, you might find, you know what, wasn't necessarily, I still need more work. Mm-hmm. And it's a real problem, and you just, in the sense of maybe I'm fooling myself by trying to justify it, but I'm experienced. I've been doing this for so long. I not only design speakers, I go and present them in different rooms around the world with different systems. I know what I'm listening for. It's programmed into me. It's like the brain equivalent of muscle memory. I've done it so much that I don't even have to think about it. I know I'm going to have the right answer. Gives you great comfort. Mm-hmm. Is that real? I don't know. I'm not a brain scientist either. But I kind of think that way. Yeah. When you experienced enough in any field, you'll spot things immediately that other people won't. And so I kind of say to myself, yeah, Jones, you know what you're doing, so just stop worrying and get on with it.
I do find it interesting because I think the one thing that consumers battle against is, and this is a very real, like, serious thing, is have I wasted my money, or did I make the right purchase? Yeah, purchase regret. And sometimes I see people online that are just like looking for reviews because they want confirmation that they did not waste their money in this thing. But you're talking about it, will this thing be good? I find it very interesting. It's like, it's the same but different on the other end. Like, did I just waste my money, or is there a consensus around this speaker that reassures me of this? It goes down to, again, your feelings. And obviously very much we know that audio and music specifically is all about the feelings. But we try to make it very scientific, like you're saying. And there is a science to it. But I find the part where it always comes back to how you feel. So yes. Such an interesting twist on this very scientific, current-driven thing. That's
at least I don't have to pay for my own speakers. There's that. Someone else has to pay for my new speakers, but not me. So, no, I get that. You've got to be aware of these things. It's like whenever I design a new speaker, let's say I do a Mark II version, what does better mean? Is it the same better for everybody? Did they purchase the first version because of its errors that it just spoke to them? So if I remove those errors, which of course I knew...
errors is the key word. That's very interesting, yeah.
Yeah, so I pick the errors that I can correct or afford to. Yeah. The ones that bug me, and I'll leave in the ones that I'll fix those later. The Mark II version, maybe you're now fixing them. But what if that person bought it specifically because the errors that it has appeals to their choices? When you bring out the next version and you fix some of those things, you go, well, no, I actually still prefer the other one. So do you get everybody who bought your Mark I buying your Mark II and your Mark III? Or are you switching to a different set of listeners that sort of, oh, I like what Andrew was doing, but it wasn't quite right for me. Now this one, so they wouldn't have bought the old one, but they're buying the new one. Am I just cycling through a different subset of people who like my speakers? And I've always got that in my mind when I'm designing something new. So you can't second guess what people want. You have to decide what you want to give them. And it gets back to, if enough people like it, I'm in business.
So you mentioned errors. When you're correcting errors, as you say, is the idea that a corrected error results in more clarity, or is it sometimes this could use a little more trouble, like a frequency response? aggregation, or is ultimately, because we're dealing in high fidelity, is it always just I'm just trying to eke out more resolution by correcting errors? When you correct an error, what are you trying to get from it?
There's all sorts of different parameters in the sound that you're trying to achieve. It's not just about clarity, detail. There's warmth, there's an emotional impact, which you can partly define by the measurements. There's a richness, obviously bass extension, those kind of things. So there are certain technical things that were wrong that contribute to particular things that you're going to hear. But sometimes resolution, if you boost the treble, it sounds more resolved until you get a bad recording and you go, it's just boosted treble. So you have to be careful about those judgments. This is why I always refer back to measurements as a control factor, so that I know I'm not straying too far away from what I would consider a target measured performance. The two still go hand in hand, but it's just since everything is wrong, because it's not the perfect speaker, then it's which wrong is right.
Do you think that there's a section of the audiophile population that confuses fidelity with just more treble?
Yes. Yeah.
Andrew, man, thank you so much for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
The Occasional Podcast is a production of the Part-Time Audiophile Network, which includes parttimeaudiophile.com, The Occasional Magazine, the PTA newsletter, and audiohead.com. You can stay in touch with us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. The Occasional Podcast is produced and hosted by Brian Hunter, executive produced by Scott Hall at PTA Productions. The Occasional Podcast and its original associated music is monitored, mixed, and mastered on the Focal Trio 6 BE studio monitors. AI songs produced by Udio.com. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the Occasional Podcast on iTunes, Google, Spotify, or wherever your favorite podcasts are downloaded.